A black woman drives a luxury car through an upscale neighborhood. She's pulled over by two white police officers who ignore her ID. Minutes later, she's in handcuffs. But a silent phone call changes everything and ends up costing the ones who underestimated her. Angela Roberts was never interested in being noticed. She believed in doing her job, doing it well, and letting her actions speak louder than any uniform. At 48, she had served over 2 decades in the U.S. Army, earned the title of general, and gained the respect of soldiers who didn't care about her gender or the color of her skin, only about her leadership. But on that night, none of that mattered. Angela had just left a meeting at the base. She wasn't in uniform. She wore a grey sweater, black jeans, a clean face, and glasses. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. Her car, a black Audi Q8, was brand new, spotless, and legally hers. She'd worked for it. As she slowed at a stop sign, blue lights lit up behind her. A patrol car, siren low but insistent. She looked in the mirror and saw 2 officers stepping out. She pulled over, turned the engine off, and rolled down her window. Calm. Collected. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Officer Bradley, early 40s, buzz cut, chewing gum, leaned into view. His eyes scanned her face, then the interior of the car. License and registration. Angela handed over her military ID and driver's license. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm General Angela Roberts. Here's my identification." Bradley glanced at the card, then smirked. "Military, huh? That doesn't mean much if this car's stolen." Angela didn't react. She'd heard worse in less official situations. From behind, Officer Kemp approached the passenger side, hand resting loosely on his holster. "Mind stepping out of the car, ma'am," Kemp said, eyes hidden behind reflective shades, even though the sun was already down. She paused for a beat. "I'd prefer to know the reason for the stop." Bradley's voice sharpened. "Step out of the car, now." Angela exhaled slowly. She knew this game. Calm was survival. She unlocked the door and stepped out with both hands visible. Seconds later, Kemp turned her around and cuffed her wrists behind her back. No warning, no resistance. Just cold steel and tight silence. The officers began inspecting her vehicle. They opened the trunk, rummaged through the glove box, searched under the seats. All while Angela stood by the side of the road, restrained, her breath steady but shallow. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she didn't beg. But in her pocket, a plan was already in motion. Angela had trained for combat, for chaos, for crisis. What she hadn't trained for, but had grown used to, was being questioned for simply existing in spaces where people thought she didn't belong. Still, she never underestimated herself, and she never traveled without backup. With a subtle movement of her thumb inside her jacket, she triggered a voice-activated call on her phone, programmed to contact one person, no confirmation needed. The call rang once. Then, "Angela?" The voice was sharp, clear. "Stopped, cuffed. No cause," she whispered. "Location," she replied with a single street name. "Understood." Click. The call ended. The phone went dark again in her pocket. The 2 officers continued searching, occasionally glancing at her as if waiting for her to panic. But she didn't. She just stood there still, breathing slowly, watching the street like it was just another battlefield. 4 minutes passed. And then, headlights. 3 black SUVs turned the corner and rolled to a stop beside the scene. No sirens, no markings. Just presence. Doors opened, men stepped out, military, senior. Their movements smooth, practiced. They didn't rush, they didn't shout. The lead man approached, tall, white-haired, eyes sharp. General Whitman, Angela's direct superior. He walked past the patrol car without a word and stopped in front of Bradley and Kemp. "This woman," he said, voice even, "outranks both of you and every officer in your department." Bradley opened his mouth, stammering. She didn't... We were just checking," Kemp added. "She was being uncooperative. We didn't know..." Whitman didn't raise his voice, didn't even blink. "You ignored federal ID. You detained a senior military officer without cause. You'll explain yourselves later." He turned to Angela. "Are you injured?" She shook her head once. Whitman nodded toward one of the men behind him. The soldier stepped forward and removed the cuffs carefully, respectfully. Angela didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The officers stepped back, silent now, realizing what had just unfolded. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a career-ending mistake. As she stepped into one of the SUVs, Angela glanced once more at Bradley. There was no anger in her eyes, only the kind of disappointment that speaks louder than rage. And that was only the beginning. Enjoying the story? Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. By the next morning, the story was no longer just between three people on the side of the road. Within hours, the chain of command had been alerted, and even though Angela Roberts had said nothing publicly, the silence didn't last. General Whitman filed an internal complaint through military channels. He also contacted the Department of Justice. But that wasn't what made the story explode. What did was a single photo. Someone from the scene, maybe a witness, maybe one of the military officers, had taken a picture of Angela standing handcuffed beside her car, flanked by two white police officers. In the background, the black SUVs, her posture upright, her face calm. The image landed online, first in a veterans forum, then in military Facebook groups, then on Twitter, and with it, just one line. This is how we treat a U.S. general when she's black and in plain clothes. By noon, national news networks had picked it up. The reactions came fast. Outrage, demands for accountability, veterans speaking out, retired generals giving interviews, civil rights advocates calling for reforms in police procedures involving ID verification and racial bias. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something quieter, but even more powerful. An internal affairs unit was assigned to investigate officers Bradley and Kemp. Bodycam footage was reviewed. Audio recordings were dissected. They hadn't turned off their cameras. Everything they said, every dismissive tone, every sarcastic comment was documented. Bradley was heard mocking Angela's ID. Kemp was heard saying, "If she really was a general, she wouldn't be acting like this." The department tried to delay the release of the footage, but pressure was mounting. Community leaders were demanding answers, and Angela still hadn't spoken a word to the press until 1 week later. At a scheduled military leadership conference in Washington, D.C., Angela took the stage. The room was filled with high-ranking officers, military families, and press. She stood behind the podium in full uniform, composed, grounded, and then she spoke. "I've served this country for 26 years. I've led missions overseas, I've stood in war zones, but what shook me most wasn't the sound of gunfire. It was the sound of two officers questioning my right to be in my own car." Her voice never rose. She didn't name the officers. She didn't demand revenge, but she didn't let it slide. "This isn't about me," she continued. "This is about what happens when power goes unchecked, when someone in uniform decides they already know who you are before you even open your mouth." She paused. "We teach young soldiers to identify threats with clarity and discipline. What are we teaching our police?" Her words echoed. The room didn't applaud at first. No one moved. Then slowly they stood, one by one. Not for spectacle, for respect. Back in their precinct, Bradley and Kemp were suspended. A week later, both were fired. Not just for misconduct, but for failing to follow protocol during an ID check. That wasn't the end of it. The city's police department released a statement. Training programs were revised. New rules were added requiring officers to verify federal or military ID before proceeding with any escalation during a stop. But Angela, she went back to work. She refused all interview requests, declined every talk show. She told her staff that this was never about fame, only principle. Weeks later, someone asked her in private why she hadn't sued the department. Her answer was simple. "I didn't need a lawsuit. I needed the system to see itself in the mirror. That was enough." And that phone call, the one made silently from her pocket, was now standard protocol among high-ranking officers. Their new feature, quietly adopted across the military. Not to protect ego, but to protect lives. Because the truth is, being a general doesn't shield you from bias, but it can expose it. And sometimes, it only takes one calm voice, one smart move, and one mistake by the wrong people to bring everything into the light. Angela didn't scream. She didn't resist. She just made one call, and that was enough to end 2 careers and wake up an entire department. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe now. There's a lot more coming.